you're an apprenticeship, you soon learn how to sharpen and learn how to use your tools, which I think has helped me in my turning. It wasn't until about, well, I guess I came to America and I always worked with wood. I worked in the boatyards until they turned to plastic and I couldn't handle working with the plastic. So I got out of that, but I stayed working with wood nearly all of my life. I come to America and I started trimming. And then I ended up building a few homes. It's funny, in the trimming business, the more you produce, the more money you made. So I did not want people around me, period, because I was losing money. And then suddenly people want me to start demonstrating, and I'm sitting in front of all these people, something that was totally alien to me, but I've slowly got used to it a little bit more anyway. But wood turning's been very good to me. I've travelled all around the world demonstrating and teaching, so I've been very lucky. But let's see. When I first turned a teapot, it was such a little hit everywhere. I put it on the internet and the local forums, and everybody was raving about it, and I thought, well, I'll make a load more. And what I'd been using a lot, and I still do, is Bradford pear. It's very bland, it's very tight grained, and when it's green it's beautiful to turn. It does go a little hard when it's gone off, but it's still a wonderful wood to work with. If you want to emboss it or do different things with it, like some of the ones I got over there, it's ideal for working with. I've worked with a lot of other ones. I've worked with bowls and ambrosia maple. They all turn out nice, but you've got to really think which way the grain's going to go if you're going to have something that's just like pure wood like this one. Although the handles are made of different pieces, if you want the grain to follow on the top, it's something you've got to think about a lot. When I first, I turned that first teapot, and then I managed to get some Bradford pear, believe it or not, this diameter. And the person that cut the trees down was a real old, they were around an old courthouse in a small Georgia village, and they had to cut them down to widen the roads or something. So this man had like 50 of them that were grown up over the years, and imagine they were that big. And I could only take about 3 or 4, because you just want to use that trunk part. If you go down anywhere near the roots or where it all spreads out, where it cracks off, it looks spectacular when you cut it with a chainsaw, but as soon as you start to cut it, it starts to crack. So you just want to stay in that center trunk where the grain is nice and beautifully straight. What I done is I decided to cut that all up, rough turn all the pieces so that I'd have a nice stock and could start making some teapots. What I do is when I rough turn them, I put them in a paper bag so that it weeps to the bags and then out to the environment. I don't usually worry about anchor seal or anything like that, and it's always worked wonderful for me. Well, I must have got about 15 out that I turned, and I turned them all side grain. And when I took them out of the bag, let me see if I can show the camera, can you see how oval that's gone? So I had like 15, and if you start to turn this after it had dried, it would come through the side here and not even touch the sides here. It just went so out of shape I couldn't believe it. So after that, I've always turned it end grain. Oh, you can see a bit better now. Can you see how oval that piece went? Well, I had about 15 of those, so I had to throw all those logs away, which was a bit of a heartbreaker. So ever since then, I've always done end grain. Now, I'm sure, like everybody else, when they started turning, I used to turn a lot of holoforms with the little finials on the top. You always want to get the maximum out of what you can out of each log. And just like everybody else, I used to turn with the pith still in the middle, you know, and use the whole log. And I had so many problems with the pith cracking. I know people like John Jordan do it and everything else, but I just got so fed up with losing so many pieces because the pith was still in there. You've got to sacrifice wood to get good pieces out. So I tell everybody now, cut the pith out of it, completely cut the pith right out of it. I think I've got a couple of pictures here. And the best thing is, if you're going to cut it out, follow those lines in the crack. Take the pith out that way, and it'll save you a lot of aggravation. That's just another stock photo. And I think I used to have a nice piece of wood. This was a Bradford pear as well. And because the weight restrictions on the aeroplanes, this used to be a thick. And I thought, oh, I cut it down to like a quarter so I can carry it in my suitcase and save some money. And sure enough, it cracked in all directions. And I put some super glue in there to try and hold it, but like, you really got to cut the pith out of it and turn the bowls on the side. Right, if you want any inspiration whatsoever, all you got to do is go to Google and Google teapots images, and there's literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands. This one here, I've just got a few to show you. This is the Brown Betty, which is mostly the most famous teapot in the world, which is the same as this one over here, if you haven't been over to see it yet. I'll get onto it in a little while, but one of the things that I'm very, positive, there's some things like form rules for me. And this goes against the principles, but they found out it became so popular because of its shape. They found out that it brewed tea better than any other teapot, so that's why it became so famous, because everybody wanted the one that brewed the tea the best. The different designs, the different handlers that you can get. This one is interesting. I just turned a teapot and it had been on the forums, and there's the camera. Oh, there it is. And I went to one of the first big AA symposiums. I think it was up in Minneapolis and Paul. And Molly Winton was in one of the vendors' booths, and she was burning away there. And she said, just the chap I want to see. She said, would you swap one of my pieces for one of your teapots? You know, would you make me a teapot for one of my pieces? And of course I said, well, yeah, I'd love to. So I said, send me some photographs of the teapot that you'd like to have made. And she sent me a couple of photographs, but this is the one that I made for her. Not this one, but this stuff, exactly the same as that, but I didn't put all the leaves or anything on it. And funny enough, it's the Winton series. She collects teapots, I didn't know that. And I don't know if you know that Molly's got out of wood turning or the burning, and that she's gone on to clay because she kept getting hospitalised from the smoke fumes. So she's almost stopped. She's still doing some of her, where she was booked up to go, she still goes and does it, but and she still hangs around and still got a lot to do with the AAW and wood turning, but she's gradually getting away from it. But I'm sure she'd be really good in clay, because she's got that form down pat as well. I think this is one you see at the mall. Unless you're English or Australian, maybe South Africa, you'll think that's funny. Where did he go? One more, I think. Oh, no, a couple more. I printed some more up. I had so many bad ones on there. I thought it was time to get some new ones on there. While I'm showing you this, if you just want to make a teapot, one of the good things looking on there, you can also find them in profile. Let me find you a better one. Like this. So if you've got a certain piece of wood, a certain size, and you want to make it that size with a computer and the printers now, you can get these printed to the size of your block of wood, which I'll explain to you as we go on. It can be a lot of help if you're just starting off or a beginner turner. When I turn these, what I try to do, as I said, if you want the grain of the wood, whatever piece you're turning, some of this you've got to visualize, I'm afraid, because as I said, it just takes me a week to make. I just done a week's class up in Aramont, and they didn't finish. They didn't finish their teapots in a week. If I have an all-day demo, I can usually do the hollowing and get right through and show you a whole lot more, but nowhere near finishing, so I'll just show you the best I can. What I do when I'm rough turning it is I try and keep the piece, make the block of wood this long, so I can make the lid and the finial on the top, or the little knob on the top, as close, or all one piece of wood, and then you'll get the grain to follow. With pear, and this is true in a lot of other wood, is that what I also try and do when I'm cutting it out the log, I'll often save the pieces on the other side to make the handles and the spout out of as close as I possibly can. It's amazing if you just go another couple of feet up the tree or the trunk, it can be a different colour. It just changes so much, it's quite incredible. And if you use a piece of pear that's from a totally different, trying to find a, like, it's amazing if you just pick up another piece of pear, well, you'll see, I guess this piece I picked up from a different, to show you how I make the lids. This, when I turn it, you'll see is a totally different colour than this. When I rough turn it, I usually leave this about 1/2 inch, maybe a little thicker, and you've got to make a consistent thickness all the way through. I just turn these by hand. I use the John Jordan with the arm brace, John Jordan hollowing tools. It's fairly easy because it's just got no depth and it's got a nice big hole. There's several things. Some of it I can show you while I'm doing it. You hollow this off. You've got to visualize. I put this back. And you've returned it. Now there's certain things that you want to do. If you look, the handle and the little knob and the spout have to be absolutely perfectly in line all the way through. So if you part this off, finish this and part it off, trying to put vertical lines on is very, very difficult. So I think I'm jumping ahead of myself here a little bit. I'll show you. I'll show you and carry on. Yeah, I've jumped a little bit. Let me go back here. As I said earlier, and this applies to all forms of turning, all forms. The most important thing to me is the form. And there's two things that make a good form. Number one, we call it the golden rule, or the golden section gauge. These you can make on the internet, the Fibonacci gauge, 1 to 1.618. The easiest way to explain it is 1/3 and 2/3. If you go to the symposium and you look through the instant gallery and there's pieces that instantly catch your eye, if you look at them closely, they often fall into that category where it's 1/3 and 2/3, because it's very, very pleasing to the eye. The second thing that's the most important thing, if you put these two together, it must have continuous flowing lines all the way through. And it doesn't matter what it is, a bowl, a holoform, everything must have completely flowing lines all the way through. And that's what gives it that pleasant, it's pleasing to the eye. Even these handles have completely flowing lines. They're non-stop. But they also go the other way, all the way around. They got to have that pleasing look, and it's got to be balanced, obviously, with the T part anyway. But with those two things, you'll get a pleasing turn-in. Now, the rule of 2/3 involves so much of our lives, you can't believe it. All the cell phones you got, the television screens, the cinema screens, all the photos on the wall, or if you've got any photos in here, or little cameras, it's 10x8, 5x7. The Greeks knew about it years ago. Don't know if we can see this very clearly. Will it focus? Okay. A woman's face, well, everybody's face, is broken down into 1/3 and 2/3. And the funny thing is, the more exact it is, the more pleasing the woman's face is. So like all the supermodels, they found out have got the closest ratio to that 1/3 and 2/3. If you go online and Google Cindy Droser's finials and the golden ratio, you'll see that it's broken down into 1/3 and 2/3, and then it's broken down into 1/3 and 2/3 again, and 1/3 and 2/3 again, and then the width is 1/3 and 2/3 again. She's got so good at it, she can do it by eye now. If you're going on and Google that up, it's like an 8-page, all in colour, all about how hers fits into the golden ratios. It's very, very clever. If you look at the human body, which way have I got to go here? The Taj Mahal is done the same way. Oh. There's another face showing the eyes and teeth, although it's not very clear, that one. And here's a perfect example, an egg. When you start off, you think an egg's easy to turn, but to get it dead right, it's not that easy. But if you follow those rules, you'll find out it looks 10 times better. In photography, They want you to put the horizon either on the top third or the bottom third, and usually the subject needs to be in one of the thirds. It's amazing how much it is involved in our lives. Rudy Osonic, his candlesticks, they're exactly a third and 2/3. And I'm sure he just made them by eye, thousands of them. When I was at Aramont, the class next door were making bandsaw boxes. And I walked in and the man was making a boat on a bandsaw. And being a boat builder, I saw this page he'd ripped out of a magazine. And I said, look at the way the boat lines flow. I know it's so they flow through the water, but it's very, very pleasing to the eye. If you go into the supermarket and if you look at the products on the walls, on the shelves, they're all designed to be pleasing to the eye, so you buy them. And it's all a third and 2/3. If you have a look next time we go in, you'll be amazed. Even like Coca-Cola signs, they're all broken down into a third and 2/3. I made a wooden one, but the airline busted it for me in the way they throw their packages around. But I don't know if you can see that. Like, it's amazing. Whoops. How your body... So this is a very handy tool. If you have trouble figuring out a third and 2/3 or the actual 1 to 1.68, this is a Sorenberger one, which are quite expensive, but I've looked online and you can find them a lot cheaper now. So when you're turning anything, try and rely on that third and 2/3. And your turnings will instantly be better and have that continuously flowing line all the way through. Now, let's get back to what I was going to show you, how difficult it is to get those vertical lines on. It's very important not to part this off. Leave it on in the chuck. And what I got a Powermatic, and I built this really fancy jig that fitted right in in the banjo, so I could just draw a line all the way around. And then I went and saw John Jordan. He was in one of our local clubs, and he just nailed 2 pieces of wood together and I had a pencil in. But as you can see, this is the Powermatic's 10 inches, and I guess this is 8. Obviously it's got to be right on the centre mark, and it's just a matter of pulling that line round there. Obviously you've got to decide where you want the spout and where you want the handlers to go. Once you've decided that, you just draw the line round and draw the line round the other side, and it saves you a tremendous amount of aggravation. Now, getting back to where if I told you was doing it on the internet, it's very handy if I'll put it here again. It's very handy for knowing where the spout's going. Everything's balanced on here for you, so you know exactly where these are going to fit. Now, if that's what I used to do. I've done it a couple of times. What I do now is I get some graph paper like this, and I put a centre mark on, and I measure from the bottom to the top and get like a pair of dividers to find the maximum size. I transfer it, oh you can see it just about when you turn it that way, and I transfer it to this graph paper, all the different measurements and the openings that you've already made here. And what I do then, visualize that this handle and the spout are not on there yet. Let me put this back so I can draw on here. Once I got all those dimensions round, once I got the dimensions, then I use a contour gauge, which this is just a small one, again, for travelling on the plains. You can buy them a foot and 18 inches now, and they are very, very helpful for getting the exact little line that you want. Done that the wrong way around, I think, like that. Let me do that again. I used to have a metal one working in trim. That's the bottom there, like that. And then that'll be the other side, like that. I used to have a metal one, but I found out I was bringing it around here and scratching all the nice surface that I finished, so then I found these plastic ones, which work a dream. What I do then is I draw different spouts. I'm going to have to twist this round. Oh, one important thing is draw a centre line, not a centre line, but a top line right across here, like here on the paper, all the way across, because if you have the spout below that, all your tea's going to pour out. So make sure you have your spout above the line. And what I do is I just draw all different shapes of spouts until I get what I want. I keep erasing parts till I get a nice flowing line and something that looks balanced that I like. Like I can just turn this, make this handle more, like so. On these handles that are shaped like this, usually they're a little thicker in the top. Yeah, just a fraction thicker there, and then they sort of tend to go thinner down the bottom there. And I try and draw it that way. Then when I get what I want, the right shape I'm pleased with, I might do it half a dozen times until I get something that looks nice, and sometimes I walk away, and you can draw the lid at what you think will suit as well. What I do then is I mark these points there. And then I measure down. Then I transfer it. I got these lines, I don't know if you can see in this, on this piece. I've got them drawn all the way around, but that's not necessary. You can just, where the spout's going to go, because you've already got the vertical line, now you want the horizontal lines where that goes, and then you'll have these lines where the handles go, and just mark them, mark them, mark them. But still keep this on the lathe. Don't take it off yet, because what you want to do is, you can see just from these teapots that I got here, they've all got different lids that suit the teapot. This one's very domed. You know, it follows the shape. It follows that continuous flowing lines all the way through. and this one fits inside, but it's still got that shape that follows it all the way through. So the best way to do that is have it on the lathe, on the lathe, so you can turn this so you can see the two together. And this is the bit of turning I'm going to show you now. You have to visualize that I've parted this off. I've still got it, when I got it rough, I put a tenon on both ends, which I haven't got here, so I'm going to turn a little tenon while I'm at it. The beauty is if you've got two chucks, obviously, because you don't want to take it out of here, is because it's wood and it compresses, and you go back on there and it'll wobble around. So it's ideal if you've got two chucks to do this, but it's not possible here tonight, so I think I've got to take this chuck off anyway. One of the best deals out there is this little contraption. It's like $3 or $4 from Ace Hardware, and I think I get so much use out of that. It's not like all the rest of the tools where they're like $100 each all the time. It's one of the best things you can buy, I think. Just going to true it up first. Usually I just true things up with a spindle roughing gouge, but that was adding more weight and I thought I'd use it so little on this, I'm just going to use a spindle gouge. I use a bidan usually to make a tenon. Like, it's not my chuck, so I better measure it. Let me lower this, I think it's hitting the Can you still hear me? Yeah. I use a bidan, but I sharpen the edges as well. So it cuts while I'm going in on the edges, either direction, which helps a lot, I think. Let me just check on this. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about which I think are really important and I misheard or misunderstood when I was learning. First of all, you want to make the tenon, is that a good spot? Like that maybe? Okay. You want to make the tenon as small as possible. Well, I say as small as possible, leave a little gap there because you'll get the full holding power. I use the dovetail jaws because I think they hold a lot better than these straight jaws or serrated jaws. Once you open it up on most jaws, all you do is end up holding it on these little points the bigger you open it, which is not a good thing. You lose a lot of holding power. The second thing is it cannot touch the bottom, and I think that's what I misheard. It acts like a fulcrum and it'll come flying off your lathe all the time, which is what was happening to me. And the third thing is it must sit on the shoulders here perfectly. So it's got to, in this case, it's got to be completely right angles. Let me have a look at the other. Now, these are slightly, these are dovetail jaws. What's really important, see this edge here, this inside edge, which would be this point here. If you don't get that cut right in, I'll move out of the way. If you don't get that cut right in there, if you just don't cut right in, you can actually undercut it. It'll sit on those and lift it off of the face of this. So it actually lifts it up, and you're not getting all the holding power. So if anything, undercut it there. And even if you've got straight jaws, it's still better to give them a very slight dovetail, because you get that extra grip. If it's the other way, it's going to be trying to pull it out of it all the time. A knockout bar. Have we got a knockout bar? In here? Oh, yeah. Oh. It's funny how you get so used to your lathe when you go and work on a different model. Like I've got a Powermatic, I keep going like this to push the button off and it's not there. And I've got one of the old Powermatics and it moves. The rest moves and the banjo moves, and I've tried tightening everything up, and so I get used to putting down on a lot of pressure. Then I go and use these one-ways. You've only got to go like that, so you keep seeing me jerking it up like this because I got so used to pushing it down. And so I just was up at Aramont, and they've got the latest Powermatic, and instead of that little screw they got on the inside, they got a cam lock in there now. And it really does work well. It's a tremendous difference. Oh, and the other thing you want to do is go around and tighten it up from all sides. You know, the chucks, it's too much play in the gears, and you can keep tightening it up easily. Let's just move this back a little bit. Now, use this as a rough guide. And if you do this, make sure you only touch one side. Everything's working backwards for me again. You just have the one that's closest to you, marking it. And it's just, as I said, it's just a rough guide. So one thing I wanted to show you, let me clean that up a little bit more. When I'm finishing the outside off of the piece, is before you sand, there can be no torn out grain. And I'll explain the inside in a minute. If you look at my teapots, I think most of those there, maybe these two are older ones, so they might not be like that. But the inside of my teapots are as nice as the outsides now. Because the good thing is it's easy to hollow because it's got a nice big hole, but it's everybody wants to put their fingers inside and feel the inside. What I wanted to show you is one of the tools I use a lot now. You've got to get rid of that torn out grain. This applies to anything before you even start sanding. And what I use a lot now, I got two of these, and they're a scraper, and you can see how thick they are. And I just use it for shear scraping. Now this is still not fully turned round, so I'll turn it a little bit more. But if there's the slightest torn out grain, this takes it off absolutely beautifully. John Jordan does the same thing. I think I saw it in one of these. Yeah, he's got one of these, you know, with the blade that twists round each end. And this is a Doug Thompson one. I had the little Sears Craftsman ones when I first started, but I soon found out the thicker stuff you get, even if you want to use it as a scraper, it's far superior. Let me just true this up a little bit more, and then I can show you what I was trying to talk about. The good thing with pear is it doesn't often have a lot of torn out grain, but if you visualize, I've got two of these, one that goes one way and one that goes the other. If you just want to, because these are like 110 each, I think, but if you just want to buy one and or grind it off like that, so you got one that goes one way and one that goes the other way, this will save you a lot of money. What you want to do is drop the tool rest down. I'm going to bring this away a little bit, and then you've got to hold it down at 45 and angle it at 45. Does that make sense? So it works like almost like a skew in the end. Let me just clean it across there. Oh, you can see the shavings coming off down the bottom there. If you see the shavings that are coming off of here, see, it acts just like a skew, and John Jordan uses that to clean his pieces up, and I do the same. I usually just use it if I got torn out grain. That's really the only place I use it, or a very difficult grain, so like a burr that's going all different directions and it's got some torn out stuff in it. If you use that, it works beautifully. If you use it like a scraper, you're going to lose the edge straight away. While I'm talking about scrapers, there's often a lot of confusion, not a confusion, but people don't realise, and this comes from working in the boatyards again with the cabinet scrapers. You have to take the top burr off even on a scraper, off first, and then put that burr back. I mean, that's about all it takes. And you've got that burr back on there again, and it's the same with the old cabinet scrapers. That's something I learned, and then I just automatically transferred it over into the wood turning world. But that's what everybody does, that uses scrapers a lot. You know, like Richard Raffin, you know, he does the bottom of the bowls. I don't bother with, let me go back a bit here. If you do use the negative rake scraper on the bottom of your bowls and you're a beginner, I would stick to it, because like I think everybody else, you can have a terrific catch in the inside if you're not used to doing it right. I was lucky enough to work with Richard Raffin for like a week and a half, and I've slowly come away, and my scraper that I use for the bottom of the bowls, I've got rid of that negative rake scraper. It does work better, but if you're a beginner, I'd stick to the negative rake because it stops it digging into the wood so much. I found the more experienced I got, the more away I've come away from that, and I think it does cut better, but it's sort of a learning process. Where am I? As I said, use this as a guideline. I jammed it down again. And taper your little tenon, I guess you could call it. Broke your lathe. The good thing with a teapot is that they don't have to be a super tight fit. The second thing I do is make a little recess in there, just like real teapots. I think it's so your tea drains back inside. What I've gradually learned over the years is my parting tool is the width and the depth. So I usually go the width and the depth, and it stops me keep using, or it saves me a bit of time using the little the gauge. So I've got a good idea of where it's going to be just by getting it close. What you've got to remember is this top section on this teapot rolls down, so that last cut has got to follow that shape. It's easy to forget that. Like if I just keep going in there straight, you're going to have a gap underneath there. I'll use this. Ooh. I've got a lot of waste here, so I'm going to remove quite a bit here as well. if you make that beveled, you can, and just turn it, you can see where the little bruise is. This one rolls back, so you can start to do the, we've turned those parts, so we can roll this back. And of course you can, you need to hollow the inside out as well. I usually clean this one up with a scraper, just a half round scraper. I think that's a little long, so I'll cut it back as well. Now this is where having two chucks comes in handy. Now this body of the teapot, it's been out, in and out of chucks so many times, you can see that it's going to and I've had it for years, so it's a little warped as well. But I'm not making a masterpiece, I'm just showing you the steps that I take it through. Oh, made that a little tight, but that's okay, you can use it as a jam chuck. See, everything's wobbling now, so when I was just turning the inside of that, hollowing the inside of that out, for those of you who didn't think about it, that was the correct way to do it. It wasn't that going in like a bowl wasn't the right way to do it, because this is end grain. So you pulled from the middle to the outside to get the smoothest cut. Just in case you thought I was doing it wrong. Just switching to a 3/8 spindle gouge. If you see a lot of my grinds, well, all my grinds, I got them swept back because I like to do that shear cutting. While I'm talking about the grinds, if you go on his site, Doug Thompson's site, you can print this off, and if you use this Wolverine system, that is set up exact, and that's an actual size of it. And it works perfectly for getting all the angles right. You know, the bowl gauge 60, spindle gouge 40, detail gouge 40, the scraper 20, and the skew 40. What Doug Thompson says is, if you, all those people like Ellsworth grind, Jimmy Clues, whoever it is has got a different grind, they're all based on that, all based on those angles. So they all start off with that same grind. And like, it's just like mine, I just grind mine way back, but it's still 40 degrees. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a degree here or off, you know, but if you're within that range of 40 for the spindle gouge and 60 for the bowl gouge, they all start off with that, and then they just add their own modifications to it. So if you really want to just get really the basics, he's got this on his site and you can just download it. Or if anybody needs it, they can take this one. What I want to show you is a little trick I learned along the way. if you made that so loose and you want to finish it off, or you got a more complicated frenulum, not frenulum, what do you call it? Cap, yeah, lid. The easiest way, and this works for a lot of other things like box makers, this work well with, and this only takes like a couple of minutes to make. You get a scrap piece of wood, and preferably you want to hold it in this part at the bottom of the lid here, and it can be just a 1/16. It can be as close as a 1/16. But those parts, hopefully it'll work on this one. I usually use it with my jaws. Yeah, you want to make it so that's inside the jaws, and the lid part there that it's holding is within the jaws. Then all you do is just, and obviously you can just go straight through here because you've got a hole in your chuck. And then just go to your band store and cut on the long side, on the long grain side. And then when you put it in the lathe, in the chuck, make sure you got that slot in there, and you can put tremendous pressure on this, I hope, and it doesn't mar it whatsoever. You can see how much pressure I was putting on there, and you can just, well, you don't need to use that. I'll just someone ask something? No? Okay. I'll pass it round in a second if you want. Oh, the other thing is, I just made that lid on a wobbly teapot. Now put it on a wobbly little gadget here, or little jig. So the whole thing's all wobbling. I've got when I make one for a lid, I've got a jar, a little jam jar or a big jam jar, and I throw those in, and it's amazing how often like teapots are very close, or even other lids are that close. So I use them over and over again, but this one's been traveling in the hot and the cold, and it's got wet and dry, and you can see it's all warped. So obviously it's not going to be perfect. Pass it around if you want. Just that's slippery floor. Now the next thing is obviously the handle and the spout. Oh, let me go back to the inside. I never explained how I got it nice and smooth on the inside. Once I've used the John Jordan, the little 3/16 per 3/16 to cut it out, then I switch to the teardrop scraper, and I just get as smooth as possible as I can using that. I do use it a little bit like a shear scraper if I've got some torn out grain, but you just got to keep working and working it. And like those teardrop scrapers, as any other scraper, it does not last long. You've got to keep it razor sharp all the time. Once you've got rid of all those tear outs inside, next thing obviously is you've got to sand it. When I started off, well, first of all, the bottom's real easy because you can get the little small pads that go in there, and you can do right up to about 1/3, just by angling, because it's got a nice big hole. So the bottom section's quite easy, but obviously when you come up here it's a lot more difficult. And first of all, I started off with these commercial flat wheels, which I couldn't get on with. They're so fine. This one's 150 grit, and it's like, feels like it's 600. You know, when you're trying to sand, it just doesn't seem to make any impression. Then I thought I'd make some of my own, and I made like these little flap sanders, but with my own grit sandpaper, which was a little bit better, and just use a bolt to bolt them on, and it did work a little bit better, but I still wasn't that impressed. And what I ended up doing is I just made all these wooden ones. Let me take this off. Oh. And you can buy these sheets of Velcro with the little pads, like about a quarter, an eighth, or an eighth if you like. And I've got these to fit all different hollow forms, like these all curled round, just really rough cut on the bandsaw. I mean, there's nothing fancy about that. And if you get these little pads that are meant for bowls with the rounded edges, and I think it's because you can get the pressure on in there with your hands. And it really does work good. You'll be really surprised. And that's what I use. But it obviously can go through the grits. Right. Does anybody want this? Or are you all expert turners? Yeah, all experts, really. Where's my little drawing? What did I do there? Should be easy to see with that graph paper. There it is. What I do is, let me see, where are we? What you want to do is leave these lines on here, so you want to cut right on the shape of the bowl. And the same on the handle here. And then you can just cut round here, it's not that important, and just take it off. And I just, well, I didn't bring a block of wood with me, but I just stick it on a block of, you know, the spray adhesive, put it on there. And there's only so much you can cut out with a bandsaw. You can cut it that shape, round like that, and follow the shape of the teapot, and then you can just cut out this part, and that's about as much as you can do. With the handle, it's the same sort of thing. Can you see that? If we can bring that. Can you see the grain in that wood? Well, like, let me get a handle. What I try and do is I make that part of the trunk that I told you where it all flares out on the pear tree. I do try and save pieces. Some of them last, but if they do, because obviously you're going to have somewhere in this, you're going to have a short grain, which is not good. You know, it's going to try and crack, or split rather. So if you can follow that shape of the grain, it does lessen it a little bit, and you can just cut that out. The next thing I do, let me put that up there. What you want to do is, this piece, is mark the center, mark the centers. Imagine this hasn't been worked on yet. on both sides and down the bottom of the block. Because when you're shaping this, you want to make sure you take off the same equally each side and the same on the spout, because if it's a fraction off, you're going to see the difference. It'll really stand out. So it's very important to draw, you can draw a line all the way through. Then what I use is, to start with, I don't know if I can hang this up. I'll just lay it on here, I think. I got a Fordham at home, and I used to have, well, I still got the foot control, but I didn't like the foot control. I switched it to one of those dial ones, because I found my foot was going up and down like this all the time. With the dial one, you can just dial it and sit down, it's easy. So I don't know how this one works. Builds up speed. All I do is get this rough shape by using this. Now what you got to remember, like I said earlier, you got to have those continuous flowing lines, and it doesn't take long when you're doing this to see where they are, or see what you've got to take off them. And it really doesn't take that long to make one of these up to this stage. Once I've got it pretty well roughed out shape, I switch to a finer burr. This is a carbide burr. If you haven't used these new carbide pieces, they really are good. I mean, you can just use a blowtorch if it gets all clogged up, or keep it dipped in a like Joy washing up powder or soap, dishwashing liquid. It just dissolves it off, but these last forever. What I use is, I got finer ones of these. I think this is the green ones, the middle spectrum, and then they go finer and finer until you start to get a good shape all the way around. The next thing you want to do, is you've still got these center lines on the top and bottom, or you can transfer them. At the same time you're cutting all this out, you can start to hollow this out until it's a half decent fit, till it's just a half decent fit. And remember, you've got these horizontal lines, so while you're just rough shaping this to fit, keep using that same mark all the time. Put it back on that mark, exactly the same place, and then till you got it rough, fitting roughly half decent. The next thing you want to do is transfer those center lines to the inside and then find the center. And obviously this is very important as well, because you've drawn these vertical lines, and if it's a 30-second off, you're going to spot it. So it's vital that first of all you use an awl and get that center point. The next thing is make a pilot hole. What I end up using is 1/4 of an inch dowels. So if you go and drill, the people that have been in a different business like engineering or scientists or whatever, and they're not used to drilling wood, if you just stick a 1/4 bit in there, it's going to follow the grain and drag one this way, that and the other. So just drill a pilot hole, like a 16th first, then build up to your 1/4 and drill a 1/4 hole in there. Now there's a good reason you want to get this dowel in there. If you get this dowel in here, you can put this in a vise and you can shoestring this finished piece off, this spout off, and it will show you where your high spots and low spots are. Because you've got to finish this edge off here first before you start the final fitting at the inside. If you've not got this outside finished, it's not going to work and have a perfect fit. So you can just put a nice long dowel in there, and you can put that in a vise, and I said, you know, shoe shine it. Now, I want to show you a little thing that I do. I used to buy the 1/4 inch dowels. Why is that springing back? Anybody know? Anybody got it one way? I'm frightened to switch it on. It look. What did I do?
What's it doing now?
Try and turn it. Put it towards you. That's turning there. You want to turn it on?
You're all right there.
Thank you. What was it?
No idea. Something with the belt, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this little piece is pieced out around, but I can still work with it, I think. Yeah, I used to go down the store and buy all those dowels, but I live quite a distance from the nearest store. I live way out in the countryside. And I usually do this with a skew, but I didn't bring one of those either. I just cut this piece off. Just cut it down to close to what you want, like a 1/4. And now this works with any size. You get your wrench and you go to the grinder and you just touch that little edge there. And you got yourself the cutting tool. So if you can see that. If you just cut on this edge, which on this one would be that one there, and then you can use it. Let me get a little bit closer. And this works. This is a 1/4 wrench, and it works on any size, like 3/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4. So it comes in very handy. Not too close. I usually part it off with my skew, but I haven't got one here. So now the real good part about this, what I found out, is when you bore a 1/4 of an inch hole into the wood, it fits very, very tight. And the reason that is because the wrench to fit a 1/4 of an inch wrench to fit a 1/4 of an inch nut has got to be a fraction bigger. So that's just a hair bigger, and the same with all wrenches, or spanners as we call them in England. So that's what makes it a perfect for a dowel, and especially in these. If you look at my teapots over there and put your fingers on the inside, I don't put my dowel all the way through, but for demonstration purposes I do. And if I would advise you, if you're making one for the first time, is make it go all the way through, and you can make it really smooth on the inside, because it's a real pain. I usually cut these down to about a 1/4, so that's only ends up an 1/8. So it's a really aggravating sometimes. Now, you've got that all sanded nice. I can see it here, there it is. You got your handle, and you do the same thing, get it all shaped nice and all the way around. And what I usually use on the handles are steel pins. So again, you've got the center line all the way around, and you transfer it to the inside, and you got this fit in half decent as well. Yeah, I'll carry on, I'll explain that in a minute. Now, it's a little bit different here, because you would think you would put that in the center of the fattest part and drill it in there for the steel pins, and the same down here. Can you see those clearly on the screen? Okay. What would be the problem there? Must be an engineer in the room. I beg your pardon? Ah, exactly. It won't fit into the pot. If they're like that, let me turn it round. If you try and put that into the teapot, does it show on there? Which way have I got to turn? That's it. It's not going to work. You won't be able to get it into the teapot. Those pins have to be parallel. So you'll be moving on the other side. I've got them parallel. If you look on this side, see, I've got them parallel. So it's not going to be in the center of this. It's going to be moved to the outside here to get into the fattest part, and the vice versa at the bottom. It's going to be to the outside again to get into the fatter part. So they're parallel. And I use the same thing. You want to use an awl to get a center when it's good to put these lines on there, so when you're drilling you can follow those lines. And I usually just put those steel pins with super glue for the moment, just again, so you can shoe shine it, put it in a vise and shoe shine it, and just get it all fitting nicely. Sometimes fitting this to the teapot is a little harder. I think it's because it's got two places to try and get fitting at the same time. So I try and get them to fit at the same time together. Let me show you what I do. So you've got them fitting, got it fitting half decent. And one thing you can do is, this is a bit big, but it gives you the same idea, just to double check that you're still going to use those lines all the time. If you follow this round, there's a spot where it looks good and it doesn't look good. I mean, you can gradually see it. I know this is a bit big, but you can just double check and then see if you are on those lines, because this is another important part. What you do, I didn't bring those either, use like a pair of the calipers with the points on, you know, like the ones that are straight with the nice sharp points on. And what I do is I measure, can't see my tape there, staring me in the face, I know it is. There it is. From that, you go back to the piece that you're going to fit. With the calipers, you set them between that point and that point. And you've been using this top line all the time, so you measure, or you just use your calipers and made a center mark right on that vertical line. And then the same thing, use an awl and then use a pilot drill to build up to that 1/4 of an inch hole. I always put the dowel in here first, because if you get this off a fraction, you can adjust it on here like a fraction one way or the other way to suit. So that's how you get the position of that hole. And it's the same with the handles. You just measure wherever you got your lines, where your horizontal lines, you just hold your calipers across there, you make a little center point. But this also is quite easy, because you actually drill horizontal to the floor. When you still use a pilot drill, but these will be horizontal and parallel to one another, so it fits in. So if you just drill it so it's parallel to the floor, you'll be okay. Now you got to the stage, one more thing, drill the hole in the middle when you're at the rough stage, and it's easy just to hollow that out with a little burr. I've forgotten until I got it right on there, and I was getting ready to glue up, and I thought, I'll just do the hole once it's all glued up. And sure enough, my drill caught and snapped the spout in two, so that wasn't too smart. So I gave that up on that idea of doing that again. What I do is, you've got those center lines, top and bottom, the vertical lines, and you've got the center lines on the spout, top and bottom, and you have to line those up every single time. And what I use, move some of this. You get your old typewriters out, and you get your carbon paper out, and you just loosen this off a fraction, and then make sure it's on that center line, and give it a pull, lift it off, make sure it's on that center line every single time, go all the way around. This is the piece that can take forever. And then when you take it off, you can see all the highlights. And they're the ones what you want to take off. At home, I switched to a micromotor now, because it's, the Fordham's got a lot of vibrations, and the micromotor's much easier to work with. And I've used this burr on the micromotor. I don't know if you can zoom in on that, can you? Let me hold it where it's wide. It's just a little tapered burr. And this one's quite fine. What I do is see all the high spots. Oh, I don't want to start the lathe. Then all you do is take those high spots off. This there. Then you put it back on there again. Do the same thing a few thousand times. It often does take that long. Sometimes it goes good and sometimes it doesn't. So if I haven't done it in a few hours, got it half decently fit in, I just go and turn a bowl or something like that because I can't sit down for that long. And it all depends how good a fitting you want, but I mean, if you wanted a really good fit, it really does take a long time. And of course, if you just slip and touch that edge, you know, you're just starting off again. And I'll give you a little tip for anybody that wants to do this, another little tip I should say, is when you keep taking this outside off, you tend to forget, let me get my little pointer, this here has gradually built up. And I got one of those little carving knives, the little curved ones, and you've got to cut this away because there'll be a point, you put it on and you say, well, I'm putting the carbon paper around. No, of course, it's obvious you can go to Michael's and Hobby Lobby now and get the modern stuff instead of your typewriter. But like, there's tons of that typewriting paper around because people never used it unless they've thrown it away. But you'll find a place and you'll get to a point and it won't be loose all the way around, and it's because it's being held off right down there. And that can be, if you forget about it, so because you're taking this off on the outside, it's getting, you know, the inside's coming up, so you need to keep cleaning that away. It's easy to forget, I can tell you. Now, the next thing is you're going to put it all together. Oh, I've tried other things with the handles. I put this in a jig, I don't know if you can see it. I just turn these very quickly on a bandsaw to eliminate the short grain, and I mean it is, you'd never ever bust it, and that comes from my days of working in the wooden boats. You know, you got the hanging knees, which are sometimes often laminated if they didn't have all the oak or ash beams. It works brilliantly, but I just didn't like it. I just didn't like the effect. I guess if you painted it, it'd be okay. I tried using that comp wood, you know, the stuff you can bend. I didn't like that either, so I just stick with the wood that comes with it. Have you got that the lid back again? Oh, lovely, cheers. I know it's not polished, but you can see a distinct colour. There's a distinct colour change, you know, in different pieces of pear. The next thing you want to do, once you've got it all together, is glue it up. I can usually show this, but it's usually hard in a big room. I usually just move it off of those lines, like the cameras are right here and they can zoom in. I'll move this off like a 16th, like a 32nd rather, and then put it all together. And mostly the people in the front will be able to see it, but you can see they don't line up. And that's just like a 32nd. See, it's just a hair, but I mean, it really is just a hair off. With the cameras that can get right in, you can see it, but and you'd have to come up and have a closer look. But they've got to stay perfectly in line. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is also very important. Is on the gluing up. You move some of this out of the way. Have a trial run first, because if you get the glue in there and it is that 32nd off, you're going to get in trouble. And because everything's round, it really is a job. I've tried clamps, everything under the sun. What I found works best is woodcraft, or I guess you can get them other places as well, but you can get a bag of these elastic bands, and they come all in different sizes. And this might be a bit big for this, I'm not sure. Well, I guess that way around there. But I usually put one the opposite way to give it a bit of grip on the rubber. And this is going to be a bit loose, but you get the idea. But you want to keep trying, because it's surprising how difficult it is to get it clamped down, because this is going to be clamped like all night. And after spending hours and hours and hours getting it to fit perfect, you don't want it a 32nd off, so have a dry run first. Now, when you get to the handle side, I usually do the spout first, because when you put the handle on, let's see if I can do this. You do the spout first and you've got that right, and then you put the lid on, you can tell I'll push it out. So you can just, if you've put that on there sideways, but with the elastic bands or the rubber bands, it's easy just to pull it one way and it pulls it back. So it's really easy to do, to get it right, because you can just run a straight edge across the top, like a rule, a steel rule, and you can see if everything's in line. Now, what you want to glue it with is, don't use super glue. You spend all that time getting this wonderful finish on here, and a drop of CA glue on there, it ruins it. CA glue does break down over time, it's no good. Epox is okay, but it can also be messy. What I use is the original type bond glue, not the 2 or 3 the new ones, because they're waterproof and they do stain the wood as well. Now the next thing is, when you use before you put this on there, and you mostly can't see it as well, but I use a sharp knife in this area where it's going to go and cross hatch it. And that's another thing I learned from boat building days, I guess. You understand what I mean? Like score it to cross hatch it, and the same on here if this is pretty smooth, so it gets a really good bond. Now when you put it together, if it does squeeze out, and it says clean up by water, don't be tempted to get a wet towel and wipe it around, because it causes that suction inside, and it'll give you a line all the way around, not a line, a groove all the way around. So what you do is you want to leave it for a while, or leave it for like 30 minutes, depends on the humidity, the time of year and everything else. And then when it gets rubbery, you can just get a sharp knife and cut it round and just peel it off, and then you haven't got that nasty, it's like a hollow, it sucks it in and looks like a groove, . So then you glued it up, right? What's next? The finish. When I started turning, I'd done a lot of hollow forms with the finials, and I was doing the art shows, the fairs, and I gradually moved up to the high-end art shows, and I'd spend all that time lacquering them and varnishing them and making them real glossy, and it only took a chip and like you'd have to really take the whole lot off again and start again, and I hated that part of doing it. What I use now is, and everybody asks me what it is, and I decided to take a picture of it and print it out so you can see. I just use a rattle can. See if I can't find it now. It's Krylon matte finish, but this one. It's number 1311, and it has the little paint brushes on, and it's not like the other ones, and it's not even in the same places as the lacquers and the varnishes and everything else that Krylon sells. I can get a piece like this, all glued up and finished. I walk outside and I can spray it and wait 30 seconds. I give it a second coat, and I usually give it 3 coats, and on the inside as well, and on the bottom of course. And like in 5 minutes I finished. I walk inside, and if I want a gloss like this, what I didn't like was the look of plastic, but I like a look of a nice glossy lust. You know, I think it looks 10 times better. I just go inside, and if it's got any slightly oversprays, you can almost not make this stuff run. It's a fixative. That's what it really is for painters. That's why it's got the paintbrushes on the front. John Jordan uses this, Dixie Biggs uses this, and a few other people that have got those beautiful pieces out there, they just use this. What I usually do then after that is, if there's any overspray, because it's round, you can usually feel if it's fuzzy, but like I'll just get a very, very fine steel wool and rub it with my hands very, very lightly. And then if I want a gloss on it, I go to the buffing machine and I buff it with the white diamond, and then I do it with the Tripoli, and the wax, just throw that wax away, it's useless. I use the Renaissance wax. That'll stop when people pick your pieces up from getting all the fingerprints all the way around. It goes very hard, it stays glossy. The wax loses its luster in just like a month. It's just a waste of time, that wax. What I do after I put the Renaissance wax on, the one that I used to buff the wax with, I give it a very, very, very light buffing of the Renaissance wax. Okay, just at the end, is there any questions? Oh, hang on, there's one question I've got to ask you. Who's taking me to the airport tomorrow morning? Okay, I'll let you all go home then. Are there any questions? I hope you enjoyed the demo. Thank you very much.